There's something strange about abandoned camps. The fire pits are cold, the benches are rotting, and the air always feels too still, like the forest is holding its breath. I remember wandering through one deep in the woods, my flashlight beam cutting across empty cabins and rusted lantern poles. The fog drifted between the trees, and every sound seemed to vanish as soon as it started. The silence was heavy, broken only by the crunch of my own footsteps on gravel. The deeper I went, the more I felt like I wasn't alone. At first, it was small, shadows shifting in the fog, a faint hum just beyond hearing. Then, as I stood in the middle of the camp, I realized the shapes weren't part of the trees. They were taller, thinner, watching me from the edges of the dark. I should have left then. I should have turned back before I stepped inside that cabin. But I didn't. I opened the door, and that's when I saw it. The forest was quiet, but not still. A thin fog curled around the trunks, pale and clinging. It smelled faintly of wet earth and something older, decayed. I followed the narrow path, leaves crunching softly beneath my feet. The sun had fallen behind the hills, leaving the world in that fragile gray, the kind that blurs edges. Then I saw it, the fire pit, stone circular, worn by years I could not count. It sat in a clearing, alone, as if waiting for me. The ashes inside shifted, not with the wind, but of their own accord. A tiny spark leapt upward, vanished before it touched the night. Then another, and another. I crouched. The air smelled faintly of smoke, though the wood inside had long since turned to dust. I reached toward it, cold. Nothing burned, nothing moved, but everything seemed alive. Shadows gathered, not like animals, not like trees. They pooled, dark and patient, around the circle. They didn't speak. They didn't breathe. They only waited. I wanted to leave. Every instinct told me to, but my legs were still, held there by the hum, quiet, low, inside my chest. The ashes shifted again, a soft rustling, like silk brushing against stone. And then, slowly, tiny sparks floated upward, twisting into shapes I could almost name. Faces, maybe, or hands. Shapes that disappeared if I tried to focus too hard. I leaned closer. The smell changed. Not smoke anymore. Something metallic, cold, like old blood hidden under the leaves. My breath caught in my throat. I swallowed. It felt wrong. Yet, I couldn't look away. The shadows stretched. Closer now, edges of them brushing my skin. But I felt nothing, only the pull, the soft insistence that I stay. I whispered to myself, quiet, not aloud, just fragments. What are you waiting for? No answer, only the pit that never burned out. And then a soft shifting underfoot. The leaves rustled behind me. I spun, heart thudding, but nothing moved. Still I could feel it, watching, patient, waiting. The sparks rose again, flickering in patterns I could almost understand. A ring of them, delicate and alive, floating above the pit. They twisted, danced, then vanished into the fog. Silence fell, absolute, so thick it pressed against my ears. The shadows were gone, but the hum lingered, low and steady. Inside my chest, inside my head. I sat at the edge of the clearing, just to watch. The ashes still shifted, quietly like breathing. Every so often, a spark would leap and vanish, and the shadows would return at the corner of my vision, just long enough to remind me I was not alone. The air grew colder, fingers of frost curling around my wrists. The smell, again metallic, faint but unmistakable. I wanted to stand. I wanted to run. But my body remained still, rooted by something I could not name. I realized the fire had never burned, yet it was alive. Not wood, not flame, something older, something patient. I tried to look away. The fog swallowed the edges of the clearing, hiding the world beyond. But my eyes kept finding the pit, the ashes shifting, the sparks floating, the shadows waiting. I felt my heart slow, then speed again, a rhythm that matched the quiet pulse of the pit itself. It was hypnotic, terrifying, and I couldn't leave. Finally, I lay down on the damp earth, not asleep, not awake, just listening, feeling the faint warmth, though the fire never burned, hearing the whispers I could not name. seeing shadows where none should be. The night deepened, the fog thickened, and still the pit glowed. I do not know how long I stayed. Hours? Minutes? A lifetime in a single heartbeat. The sparks, the shadows, the cold. They became part of me. Softly, quietly, patiently. Eventually, I stopped trying to leave, stopped resisting, and in the quiet, I realized the fire had been waiting for this, for me, and it would wait for anyone else who came too close. The ashes shifted. A single spark leapt upward. It lingered in the air, faint, eternal, watching. The air was still, early autumn, the leaves damp and heavy, clinging to the ground. Fog rolled low across the camp, pale and restless, hiding the edges of the forest. I wandered through the center of camp. The fire pit lay cold. Other cabins stood dark, shuttered, silent. And then I saw it, a cabin, alone, sealed, no doors, no windows, just walls, smooth and unbroken. It made no sense. I circled it slowly. The wood was old, warped in places, smelling faintly of pine and decay. My fingers brushed the surface. Cold, a slight vibration underneath, subtle, almost a hum. As night fell, I noticed something. Light, soft, flickering, inside. From nowhere I could see. It cast shapes against the walls. Shadows moving, stretching, folding. I wanted to step closer. Curiosity curled in my chest. A quiet dread followed each step. The fog thickened around my ankles, cold and damp. The shadows shifted. I could almost see them breathe. Tall shapes, small shapes, unsteady. They moved as if the cabin was alive. I strained to hear anything. Only the hum under the wood. My own breath in my ears. Leaves rustling far beyond the clearing. I pressed my palm against the wall. It was solid, unyielding, yet warm. Faintly, like a pulse. I felt the vibration again. Saw footsteps, I thought, but no one walked there. I circled the cabin again. Every side identical. The flickering light continued. Shapes inside shifting in ways I could not understand. I crouched, trying to peer under the edge of the cabin. The fog swallowed everything. I could smell the cold earth, wet leaves, and something else, metallic, faint, hidden under the pine. The cabin seemed to breathe with it. Slow, steady, patient. The shadows began to stretch upward, elongated, leaning over the roof. I realized they were not only inside the cabin. They pressed outward, reaching through the wood, bending the edges of the fog. I whispered to myself, not aloud, who's in there? No answer came. Only the flicker, only the shift. I stepped back. The earth beneath my feet was soft, cold. Leaves clung to my shoes. The hum pulsed faintly through the soles of my feet. I watched the cabin for what felt like hours. Sometimes the shapes inside paused, frozen mid-motion, like a memory caught in amber. Then they moved again, slow, intentional, unaware of me yet aware. I reached out once more. The wall quivered under my touch. A vibration that ran up my arm, cold and wet. I flinched, stepped back. The shadows bent. A flicker of something pale in the corner of my vision. I couldn't leave. Not yet. The cabin called softly, pulling at the edges of my mind. A quiet insistence. A hum I felt under my ribs. I crouched at the edge of clearing, listening, breathing, the fog curling around my knees. Time seemed to warp. Minutes became hours. Hours became a single heartbeat. The shadows moved a rhythm, gentle, patient, eternal. I could not stop watching. Eventually, I lay on the damp earth, eyes on the cabin, fingers brushing wet leaves, the cold earth grounding me, holding me in place. The light flickered, one shape then another, then they paused, vanished. The fog swallowed the edges again. Silence fell, absolute, and still the cabin glowed faintly, waiting, alive. I do not know if anyone has ever entered, or if anyone ever will. The walls hold secrets too old for voices. Only the flicker remains. I close my eyes, feeling the pulse beneath the wood, listening to the hum beneath the earth. And I knew some doors are never meant to open. The night pressed closer, fog curling through the trees. The cabin, patient. Shadows still moving just beyond understanding. Light flickering quietly. I stayed until the sky turned pale, until the edges of the fog thinned, until the hum slowed, and then I walked away. Yet the cabin remained, sealed, alive, waiting. The night was still. Autumn had left a thin frost over the ground, sharp underfoot. Mist hung low, curling around the trunks of the trees like fingers. I walked through the empty park. The metal of the swings glistened under the pale moonlight. Cold, wet, fresh, though no rain had fallen. They moved, slowly, in perfect rhythm, back and forth. No wind stirred. No one pushed. Yet they swung. I stepped closer. Sand shifted beneath my feet. A faint, wet smell rose from the ground. Footprints, small, bare, pressing into the damp sand, leading toward the swings. And away again. The chains creaked softly, a hollow, metallic hum that wrapped around me. I could see my breath, pale and trembling in the cold night air. Shadows stretched across the ground, long and unsteady. I reached out, fingers brushing the nearest swing. It vibrated beneath my touch. Cool, alive, a faint pulse, almost like it remembered the hands that had held it before. The swings move higher now, faster, each rhythm perfect, like someone invisible and patient, riding them alone. I crouched by the sand. Footprints pressed deeper, with each pass of the swing. Not human, not quite. Too small, too narrow, and wet, glistening like the chains above. I leaned back, trying to make sense of it. The night smelled of cold metal and damp earth. The mist hugged my legs. Soft footsteps whispered somewhere behind the park, then vanished. The moonlight caught the swing chains again. Silver, sharp, shimmering as if polished in secret. I blinked, and the rhythm seemed to slow, then speed up, a silent heartbeat in motion. The shadows beneath the swings moved too, stretching toward me. Or maybe I imagined it. I could feel them brush my legs, my arms, the air around me heavy with waiting. I wanted to run, but my body stayed, fixed, drawn to the gentle swing of the empty seats. A creak, closer now, a whisper of air, the sand shifting, footprints forming beneath each swing, leading nowhere. And I realized no one had walked here before me. I crouched lower, fingers brushing the sand, wet and cold. The swings continued in perfect rhythm, like a memory too persistent to forget, back and forth, back and forth. I closed my eyes for a moment, listening, the soft rustle of mist, the hum of metal, the heartbeat of the night, and then silence, almost, a faint squeak from a chain. A shadow flickered across the sand. Gone when I opened my eyes. I rose slowly, every step careful, feet brushing the frost and mist. The swings never stopped, still moving, still waiting. I felt the cold leave my hands and crawl up my arms. A chill that wasn't the night. Something beneath the swings, beneath the footprints. Patient, quiet, watching. I turned my back finally, walked slowly away from the park. The swings moved in my peripheral vision. Silver chains glinting, footprints lingering in sand that had no owner. I did not look back again. The moonlight faded behind the trees. Mist curled over the ground, but I could still feel it. The rhythm of the swings, the weight of waiting, the soft echo of footsteps that belonged to no one. I know they will always be there, back and forth, patient, eternal, and waiting for the next to come too close. The lake was still. Fog hovered low over the water, thick and cold, curling around the reeds and the shoreline. Autumn had left a damp chill in the air, sharp in my lungs. I stepped onto the dock, what creaked faintly beneath my boots. Each step echoed softly, swallowed quickly by the fog. The dock stretched far, narrow, dark, disappearing into the gray. The boards were slick with mist. I could smell the wet wood, the faint rot beneath it. A hum rose from the lake, quiet, constant, under the silence. And then I saw it, a shadow, tall, at the far end of the dock, unmoving. The figure did not blink, did not breathe, did not sway. The reflection in the water, clearer than the shadow itself. Every detail mirrored in the lake, sharper, brighter, as if the water held some truth the dock could not. I could see the outline of shoulders, the faint curve of a head, but no features, nothing human. I took another step. The boards shifted underfoot, cold and damp. My breath caught. A faint rustling came from the reeds along the shore. Not wind, not animal, something else. The shadow remained, silent, waiting. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow at first, then faster, carrying through the fog. I crouched slightly, peering closer. Mist clung to my face. Cold drops of water ran along my sleeves. The air smelled faintly metallic. The shadow did not move. The reflection swayed, ever so slightly, as if something beneath the water stirred. I tried call out. My voice caught in my throat. Only a soft whisper escaped. The shadow did not answer, did not flinch. It simply existed. I stepped closer. Every footfall muffled by the damp wood. The hum beneath the dock grew louder in my chest. Soft, insistent, pulling at something inside me. The water rippled. The reflection shimmered. And I realized it was watching me. Not through eyes I could see, but through something older, patient, infinite. I froze. Fog swirled around my ankles. The chill crept into my spine. I could feel the boards tremble under me, though no wind blew. A soft splash. Behind me or beneath me, I turned slowly. Nothing moved, yet the hum grew deeper, resonating through the dock, through my ribs. I dared a step forward, closer to the shadow. The water reflected it perfectly. Every detail I could not see in the dark above. A hand, a head tilt, something that should not have been possible. The dock ended. I stopped. Footsteps could go no further. The shadow remained. The reflection continued to shimmer. I felt a presence beneath me, unseen, pressing up from the water. Soft, patient, waiting. I crouched again, staring into the mirrored surface. Fog and reflection blurred, the line between real and water dissolving. My own face appeared faintly behind the shadow in the lake. A breath I hadn't taken. Eyes I hadn't opened. I stepped back slowly. Would moan under my weight. The hum faded slightly, but lingered, low and insistent. The shadow did not move. It simply waited. I could smell the damp decay of the dock, the cold earth along the shore, and the metallic tang of something beneath the water. I breathed slowly, deliberately, trying to ground myself. The fog swirled around my knees, curling like soft fingers. I turned to leave. The dock seemed longer now, the shadow farther away. The reflection stayed. Clarity in water obscured above. I walked back carefully, each step echoing softly. Swallowed quickly. I could feel the cold mist brushing my neck, my sleeves, my hair. The hum lingered in my chest. When I reached the shore, I paused. The shadow on the dock remained, its reflection perfect, unchanging, patient, waiting for the next step, the next glance, the next breath. I walked into the trees. The fog swallowed me slowly. Branches tapped softly against my jacket. The dock receded behind me. The hum faded but did not leave entirely. I knew it was still there. The lake was still. Fog wrapped around the dock, around the shadow, around the reflection. And I knew some shapes wait forever at the edge of the water, silent, patient, watching. I did not look back, but I could still see it, in my mind, in every shadow, in the hum beneath my ribs. The dock stretches on. The shadow waits. The lake reflects it perfectly. And the silence is infinite. The air inside the bunkhouse was heavy. Autumn wind pressed against the broken walls. The boards creaked under the weight of fog that had seeped in from outside. I stepped carefully through the doorway. The floor was littered with splintered wood and old leaves. A damp, metallic smell clung to the air. The beds were empty, rows of them broken, sagging, dust coating every surface. I ran my fingers along the frame of the nearest bed. Cold, stiff. A faint hum seemed to rise from the wood itself. And then I heard it. Whispers, soft at first, indistinct, like voices tangled in the rustling of the wind. I paused. The air shifted. My own breath came faster, uneven. I took another step. The whispers grew, not loud but closer, more insistent. A low chorus from the empty beds. I bent closer to the first bunk. The dust stirred beneath my fingertips. The voices circled me, moving in the corners of the room. I could feel them brushing my skin. Cold, thin, almost liquid. I walked down the aisle between the rows. Every step slowed by the way of the hum in my chest. The whispers rose with each footfall. They echoed off the walls, curling into the rafters. I could smell the decay, the damp wood, and something sweeter, faint perfume, impossible for this place. Then one voice, clear, calling my name, soft, insistent, personal. I froze. A cold pressure pressed against my back. The floor groaned under invisible weight. I tried to move. My legs would not obey. The air vibrated with whispers now, every bunk joining in, every word overlapping. I crouched to a bed, my hands pressed the frame, cold, wet, alive beneath my palms. The voice repeated my name, closer, more deliberate. I dared to look up. Shadows clung to walls, stretching, folding into the corners. They moved with the rhythm of the whispers, alive, patient, waiting. I tried to speak. Nothing came. The sound of my own breath drowned by the chorus. I could feel the air around me pulse. Static, thick, pressing into my skin. I moved down the aisle again. Each bunk seemed to lean toward me. The whispers shifted with me, wrapping around my head. I could smell old mattresses, damp sheets, and the faint tang of rust. Cold fingers of fear traced my spine. I stopped at the last bunk. The voice called once more, soft, deliberate. My name again, echoing through the empty room. I crouched, covering my ears. The whispers didn't stop. They pressed into my bones. I could feel them in my chest, in my throat, in my mind. I finally dared to stand. The boards groaned beneath me. The hum seemed to pulse with each heartbeat. I wanted to run, but the doorway felt far away. The shadows stretched along the walls, following me. I reached the door. The air shifted. A final whisper, clear, deliberate. My name. And then silence. I stepped outside. Fog rolled over the ground, hiding the decay of the bunkhouse. The cold air pressed against my face, damp and sharp. Leaves rustled around my feet. I looked back once. The windows stared blankly. The broken beds were still. The hum faded slowly, leaving a hollow emptiness. I walked away. The whisper of my own name lingered faintly in my ears. A memory of movement behind the walls. A sense of eyes on my back. I did not turn again. But the bunkhouse waits. Empty beds. Whispers pressed into the corners. Cold and patient. I could feel in my chest still. A low hum. Static that would not fade. The voice waiting. Somewhere inside the air still moves. The shadows fold into the corners. And the empty beds remember every name they hear. The forest was quiet. Fog lay heavy across the path, curling around the roots and low branches. The damp earth smelled of moss and decay. I walked slowly, boots pressing into soft soil. The air was cold against my face. Every step felt muffled, swallowed by the hum of the night. Then I saw it, a lantern, faint light spilling across the path. No one near, no torchbearer. Just a glow, steady, patient. I bent down. The metal felt warm beneath my fingers. A faint vibration ran up my arm, almost alive. Handprints burned into the surface. Old, fresh, impossible to tell. I lifted it. The glow strengthened slightly, and the forest seemed to notice. The hum rose, soft and insistent, threading through the trees, curling around my legs. I could smell smoke, faint, sweet, almost comforting, and yet the air carried something older, metal, damp earth, and fear. The light illuminated the path ahead. Shadows flickered. Trees bent closer, their limbs whispering softly in the unseen breeze. Footsteps of some creature, perhaps imagined, pressed into the moss. The handprints burned against my palm, warm, alive, a pulse beneath the metal, faint, almost like a heartbeat. I stared at it, and I realized it wanted to carry it. I walked. Every step hummed in time with the forest. The lantern glowed in rhythm. Shadows danced along the trunks. Soft whispers wrapped around my ears. Words I could not understand. A branch tapped my shoulder. Cold mist brushed my neck. I shivered. The hum rose, vibrating in my chest, through my ribs, into my throat. The path seemed longer than before. The fog thickened. I could barely see the forest floor beneath my feet. Yet the lantern guided me, bright enough to show the trail, but faint enough to feel unnatural. Handprints smudged slightly when I looked again. They shifted. Fingers pressed deeper into the metal. I felt them curl against my palm. Soft, warm, demanding. I stopped. The forest waited. The fog lingered. And the lantern pulsed faintly in my hand. I could hear something beneath the hum. A soft rustle, a sigh. Breath moving through the leaves. The lantern's light flickered. Shadows bent and leaned toward it. I carried it further. The path winding, endless. Roots curling up like hands, trying to stop me. Branches brushing my arms, brushing my face. Yet I could not drop it, could not turn back. The handprints burned warmer, the hum louder. Almost a voice inside the metal, soft, insistent. Carrying the lantern felt like carrying a secret, a weight older than the forest itself. Eventually I stopped. The path ended at a clearing. Mist rolled low across the grass. The hum softened. Shadows folded back into the trees. The lantern glowed faintly, patient. I knelt, set it down. The handprints pressed against the ground slightly, as if leaving a mark for me alone. The warmth faded. The hum lowered. I stepped back. The forest held its breath. The fog curling, alive, around my feet. The lantern remained, waiting. I could feel it, even from a few paces away. The pulse beneath the metal. The quiet insistence. The sense that it would guide the next step for someone else. I walked away. The forest returned to silence. The hum receded into the earth. But in the back of my mind, the lantern glowed faintly. Somewhere ahead, handprints still warm, waiting. The night was still. Fog drifted low over the lake, curling around the reeds and rocks. The water smelled of cold earth and damp wood. I stood at the edge of the shore. The air was heavy, quiet. Leaves rustled faintly under the trees, soft and restless. Then the sky shifted. A pale light appeared. Silent, motionless, it hovered above the lake. I froze. The water reflected it perfectly. Every detail mirrored in the lake, sharper than the thing itself. Ripples should have moved, but there were none. The light did not blink, did not hum. It simply existed. A still presence in the sky, impossible and alien. I could feel the air change. Static, faint, brushing the skin. A low vibration under my feet, as if the ground remembered something I could not. The fog thickened around me, curling against my legs. The reflection in the lake was mesmerizing, clearer than reality, sharper than memory. I leaned closer to the edge, toes gripping the wet earth. The pale light stretched, bending slightly at the edges. Perfect, unreal. Time slowed. Breath became heavier. Each heartbeat echoed in my chest. I could feel the hum of the lake, faint, almost alive. I wanted to speak, but no words came. Only a quiet awe, something older than the forest, older than the stars themselves. The light shifted slightly, not moving but changing. Angles sharper, edges smoother. Reflection twisting, bending the world in impossible ways. I felt dizzy. The fog clung tighter, damp on my skin. I stepped back, the soil soft beneath my boots. My hands brushed the reeds, cold and wet. The air smelled faintly metallic, faintly electric, and then it vanished. No ripple in the water, no sound, nothing, just emptiness where all had hung. I blinked, tried to find it again, but the sky was empty. The lake calm, still normal, yet the reflection lingered. In my mind, sharper than before. I could see the pale light hovering perfectly over the water, even though it was gone. The air pressed against my chest. The fog rolled past, soft and alive. Leaves rustled. Water lapped gently. Yet my skin still felt the memory of static. The hum beneath the lake had faded, but I could still feel it. I walked along the shore, feet pressing into wet soil. The night seemed ordinary again, but I knew something had shifted. A space had opened, just briefly, where the impossible had been real. I leaned against a tree, fog brushing my hair. The smell of cold water and damp would filling my nose. I closed my eyes. The pale light appeared behind my eyelids. I realized I would never forget it. No sound, no movement, only presence. The reflection more vivid than memory. A stillness that carried into the night. I stepped back from the water. The lake returned to silence. The fog curled and fell around me. Footsteps pressed softly in the wet soil. I could feel the weight of the unseen above me. I turned slowly. The forest held its breath. Every rustle seemed louder, sharper. Every shadow stretched a little longer. The memory of the pale light hovered in my chest. The hum in the lake beneath my feet. The impossible reflection. I walked away from the shore. The fog swallowed the path behind me. Trees whispered in the distance. The water remained still. The sky clear, ordinary, infinite. And yet I could feel it. A presence above, waiting. Silent, pale, motionless. Patient, watching. I did not look back. But the reflection, it remains. Clearer than memory. Sharper than reality. Etched into my mind forever. The morning fog lay heavy over the camp. Damp earth pressed into my boots. The smell of wet leaves and pine clung to the air. I followed the path away from the tents. At first, it looked normal. Then I saw them. Children's shoes. Small, worn, perfectly spaced in the dirt, leading away from camp. No feet inside them. No one walking beside them. I knelt. Fingers brushed the leather. Cold, damp, imprints pressed faintly into the soil beneath. They were fresh, though no one had passed here before me. I rose. The line stretched deeper into the trees. Shadows pooled between the trunks. Branches tapped softly above, brushing against the fog. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp like rust on old nails. The trail continued. Each pair of shoes evenly spaced, like a silent march into the forest. Soft footsteps, I imagined, following behind them. Not mine, not anyone's. I stepped carefully between the pairs. The earth gave slightly beneath my boots. Leaves whispered with each movement. The fog curled around my ankles, cold and damp. Some shoes tilted, others upright. A pattern I could not read. A rhythm I could not follow. And yet, they led me forward. I could hear it then. A low hum beneath the soil, or inside my chest. Steady, quiet, insistent. The kind of sound that makes you pause mid-step. Branches scraped against each other above. A crow cawed far off, distant. The fog thickened. The shoes vanished from the path behind me, as if they were never there. I reached a clearing. The line continued, but the trees grew denser. The light pale filtered, trembling, and then it ended. No shoes, no trail, nothing, just earth and mist. I knelt in the dirt, traced the fading path with my fingers. The imprint of footsteps lingered faintly, but no shoes remained, no presence. The forest seemed to breathe, softly, patiently. The hum beneath the soil faded. Leaves rustled gently, brushing my sleeves. I stood, the line of shoes gone, the trail swallowed by trees. Yet the memory lingered, the spacing of each step, the absence behind them. I turned back toward the camp. The fog hung low. Branches whispered softly. The earth beneath my boots cold, damp, and still. I walked slowly, every sense alert. Every shadow stretched longer than it should. Every step echoed faintly, swallowed by silence. The shoes were gone, but their presence remained. A quiet unease pressed into the air, a rhythm of absence that would not leave me. I glanced behind me. Nothing moved, nothing waited, only the fog curling between the trees. Yet I could feel it, the echo of small footsteps, the weight of a line of children, marching without sound, without bodies, a trail that led nowhere and ended everywhere. I returned to the camp, the tents quiet, the earth still damp beneath my boots, leaves brushing softly, and the memory of the empty shoes lingered in every shadow. The forest breathed around me, silent, patient, waiting, and I knew some paths are meant to vanish, and some footsteps are never meant to be followed. The morning fog clung to the trees. Damp leaves pressed underfoot. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, sharp and cold. I wandered toward the dining hall. The old brass bell hung above the entrance, polished by years of touch and neglect, still gleaming faintly in the pale light. The rope dangled, still. No one had touched it, yet a hum rose through the air, soft, low, insistent. The bell began to move, slowly, heavy, each swing deliberate, reluctant. The rope swayed slightly, though I hadn't touched it. The clang rolled across the clearing, deep, resonant, echoing between the trees, curling around the fog, a vibration that pressed into my chest. I stepped closer. Cold air brushed my face, fingers brushing the brass, smooth, warm beneath my touch. The bell swung again, slower this time, like it remembered something I could not. The hum beneath the wood, and earth grew, subtle but insistent. I could feel in my feet, in my ribs, a pulse beneath the ground, older than the camp itself. I paused. The rope swung empty. My breath caught. Shadows folded along the dining hall walls. Soft whispers, almost carried in the clangs, brushing against my ears. I reached up. Fingers brushed the rope. It was cold, static, faint, prickling along my skin. The bell continued, independent, slow and heavy. I stepped back. The echo lingered, each clang pressing into the fog. Shadows stretched farther, longer than they should. Branches tapped softly in the distance. Leaves rustled over damp earth. The bell seemed alive, swinging in a rhythm I could feel, but not hear fully. A steady beat in the chest, a weight in the air. The rope never moved by my hand. I crouched beside the bell post, brushing the ground, damp and cold. The hum beneath the soil pulsed faintly. Each swing of the bell added to it, resonating through my legs. Soft footsteps, imagined, echoed across the clearing. I stood again. The bell slowed. Clang softened, reluctant to end. I could feel shadows pressing in closer. Soft, patient, watching. The fog curled around the dining hall. Air smelled faintly metallic. A scent of rust, old rope, and winter leaves. The bell hung still for a moment, suspended at the apex, then swung once more, heavy, deliberate. I stepped away slowly, would moan beneath my boots. The hum faded slightly, but the echo of the bell remained in the air, in my chest, in the fog curling around the trees. I glanced back. The rope dangled, motionless, yet the bell seemed to wait for the next hand, the next breath, the next presence. I walked toward the tents, the fog curling around my legs, soft and damp, leaves brushing against boots, branches tapping softly overhead. The bell's memory lingered, heavy, insistent, patient. I could still feel it beneath the ground, a weight beneath the soil, a resonance in my chest. And though the bell had stopped swinging, its presence pressed into the fog. I did not return, yet every step I took away from it felt smaller. Every shadow seemed heavier. Every breath pressed deeper into my chest. The camp remained quiet. The fog lay thick across the earth. And the bell, patient, waiting, slow and heavy, for someone to make it ring again. The field was quiet. Fog drifted low, curling around the edges of the grass. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and pine needles. I walked slowly, each step pressed into soft soil, boots brushing against grass wet with dew. And then I saw them, a circle of sleeping bags, unzipped, empty, yet still shaped, as if bodies had lain within them. Perfect curves, soft impressions, alive in absence. I knelt beside the nearest bag, fingers pressed into the fabric. Cold, rough, slightly damp. Inside only sand, grains shifting faintly under my touch. I straightened. The fog swirled around my ankles. The air felt thicker, heavy with silence. Soft rustling carried from the grass, though the wind was still. The circle stretched wide, each bag perfectly placed, evenly spaced. The ground beneath them pressed, shaped, as if something had sat or slept here and then vanished. I stepped into the circle, boots pressing lightly into the earth. The bag seemed to watch, empty yet expectant. The faint smell of sand rose from each one, mixed with damp cloth and the faint tang of something older. A soft hum rose beneath my feet, subtle, almost imperceptible. The air pressed against my chest. My breath came shallow, uneven. I crouched again, ran fingers along another bag. Sand shifted faintly under the cloth. I could feel the shape of something gone. Something once here. The fog thickened around the circle. Shadows pulled beneath the sleeping bags. Soft, long shadows that moved without wind. Every step I took seemed mirrored by the earth itself. I rose slowly. The circle of bags felt alive beneath my gaze. Alive in absence. The hum beneath the soil pulsed faintly. A rhythm in my chest. I knelt at the center. The ground pressed lightly into my knees. The air smelled of wet earth, cloth, sand. The fog curled around my face, brushing my hair. I reached out. Hand hovered above the closest bag. It did not move. It remained perfectly still. Yet the impression of a body lingered. Soft, warm, gone. I stepped back. The circle felt larger now. The bag seemed to lean slightly inward, expectant, watching. I could hear it then. Not sound, exactly. A vibration beneath my feet. The hum rose, threading through the grass, into the fog, curling around my legs. I walked slowly toward the edge of the circle, grass brushing my boots, branches tapping softly above. The sand shifted faintly in each bag, as if remembering the weight it once held. I turned to leave. The fog pressed against my chest. Soft, damp, alive. The circle remained. Empty yet present. I could still feel it. The shape of absence. The memory of bodies that had lain here. The sand shifting quietly, almost breathing. I walked away, boots pressing into wet soil. The fog curling around my legs, soft and cold. Branches whispered in the distance. Shadows stretched long between the trees. The circle of sleeping bags stayed behind. Empty, unzipped, yet alive in memory. Waiting. And though I did not look back, I could feel them, the soft weight of absence, the disturbed silence, the earth remembering every shape it had held. I did not return, but the circle waits, soft, silent, and the sand, always shifting, quietly in the shape of something gone. The camp was quiet. Fog rolled through the trees. The scent of wet leaves and pine pressed into the air. I sat near the old radio. Dust coated its buttons. The cord frayed. It hummed faintly, static, even before I turned it on. A low, drawn-out buzz filled the tent. Fingers hovered above the knobs. The hum shifted into a pattern. Coordinates. Numbers whispered, slicing through the fog. I leaned closer. The air pressed against my chest. Every breath sharp, uneven. The numbers repeated. Soft, deliberate, measured. Then a voice. Not loud, not clear. A whisper, distant, carried in the static. Warnings. A sense of urgency. Outside, lights flickered. Between the trees. Pale, erratic, moving softly, brushing branches. Shadows bent toward them, stretching long across the fog. I adjusted the dial. The hum returned. Static, low and vibrating. The voice whispered again. Closer. Warnings tangled with the numbers. I could not make sense, yet understood. The fog pressed around the tent. Branches tapped lightly, brushing my shoulder. The smell of wet earth and faint smoke lingered. The hum beneath the radio seemed to pulse, in time with my heartbeat. I stepped outside. Soft moss pressed beneath my boots. The lights danced farther, deeper into the woods. Shadows trailed them. I could feel eyes, unseen, tracking every movement. I turned back to the radio. The voice lingered, a soft insistence, almost coaxing. Static hummed through the air. Coordinates repeated. Numbers etched into my mind. I walked slowly toward the flickering lights. Fog curling around my legs. Branches brushing my arms. The hum beneath the radio, beneath the earth, resonating in my chest. The lights paused between trees. Bright, pale, unnatural. A low vibration ran across the soil beneath my feet. Every step echoed softly, swallowed by the fog. I crouched behind a tree, hands pressed into wet bark. The radio's hum rose, vibrating through my bones. The voice whispered again. Warnings, low and deliberate. My name, perhaps, or nothing at all. Saw footsteps, imagined, pressed in the distance. The lights flickered again. The fog thickened. Branches tapped softly above. Every shadow stretched, long and patient. I straightened. The coordinates repeated once more. Numbers tangled with a hum, a rhythm in my chest, impossible to ignore. The warnings became a pattern, a map I could not follow. The lights vanished suddenly. No glow, no pulse, only shadows pressed against the fog. The radio continued its hum, the whisper lingering. I stepped back toward the tent. Air smelled of damp pine and wet soil, fog curling softly around my boots. The earth beneath seemed to remember every footfall. The hum faded slowly, but the voice remained, low, insistent, patient. Warnings carved into the silence. I touched the radio one last time. Cold metal beneath my fingers, dust and rust. The static lingered faintly, like a memory, a signal left behind. Waiting, I walked away, fog pressing against my chest, leaves brushing against my arms, branches tapping softly in the distance. The lights never returned, but I could feel them, hidden, patient, watching from the shadows. The radio hummed faintly in my mind, coordinates repeating, a voice that would not leave, soft, deliberate, insistent. I returned to the camp, the tent quiet, fog curling low across the ground, the forest breathing softly, and the signal still alive, waiting. The camp lay quiet beneath a pale moon. Fog drifted low, curling between the pines. The smell of damp earth and old wood pressed into the air. I walked toward the watchtower. Its silhouette loomed above the tents. Old, weathered, silent. The stairs had long since collapsed, broken and useless. And yet someone was there. A figure paced slowly at the top. Alone, impossible. The platform groaned faintly beneath imagined weight. Shadows folded along the beams, stretching downward, pale and long. I froze, breath caught in my chest. Fog brushed my ankles, cold and wet. The air hummed faintly, vibrating against my skin. The figure moved deliberately. Each step measured, slow. No sound came, yet the movement was precise, as if guided by memory, by habit. I stepped closer. Soft footsteps pressed into wet soil. Leaves whispered faintly overhead. Branches tapped against each other in the distance. The figure continued, pacing in silent rhythm. I imagined the stairs beneath it, collapsed, broken, empty. How could it move there? The question pressed against my mind, heavy and sharp. The fog thickened. Branches brushed my arms, cold and damp. Shadows pooled beneath the tower. The figure paused, turned, or perhaps only seemed to. Eyes I could not see traced some unseen path across the camp. I crouched behind a tree. Fingers pressed into moss, damp and rough. The ground smelled of wet soil and pine. I could hear my own heartbeat. The fog curled tighter around my legs, soft and alive. The figure resumed its pacing. The hum in the air seemed to rise, faint, almost like the earth itself breathing. Wind whispered through the tower beams. Leaves rustled in the distance. I could see its shadow clearly now. Tall, stiff, patient. The outline shifted as it walked, moving across the wooden platform that should not have supported it. I reached for the radio I had carried, then paused. Its presence felt too close, too quiet. I stepped back, deeper into trees. Fog pressed against my face. Branches brushed my shoulders softly. The ground beneath me hummed faintly, echoing the figure's rhythm above. I imagined the stairs collapsing beneath it, the impossibility. Yet there it remained, pacing, patient, watching. The moonlight caught the tower's upper beams. The shadows stretched long. The figure seemed to grow taller, thinner, its motion deliberate, slow, mesmerizing. I could feel a pull in the chest, a weight in the air. I crouched again. The fog pressed against my neck, soft and damp. Leaves rustled gently. Branches tapped softly above. The tower loomed, silent, patient, watching the camp and me. I turned slightly, tried to focus on the ground. The fog swirled around my boots. The hum beneath the earth persisted, soft, insistent, like memory echoing. I glanced back. The figure paused. No eyes, no face visible, but the sense of being watched. Weightless, yet pressing, heavy in the chest. The fog began to thin. The wind whispered through the trees. Branches brushed my arms. The tower remained, The figure continued pacing. Slow, patient, impossible. I stepped backward, boots pressing softly into damp soil, leaves brushing my legs. The shadow lingered long after I left the clearing, stretching across the camp. The air smelled of wet wood and pine. The tower loomed over everything, silent, patient, and above, the pacing never ceased. I did not look back again, yet the memory of the watcher presses into my mind. Soft, deliberate, impossible. Waiting, always watching. The fog settled over the camp. Branches whispered. Shadows pooled beneath the trees. And the figure, it remained in the tower, patient, silent, pacing. The field was quiet. Fog pressed low against the ground. The smell of damp canvas and wet grass lingered in the air. I walked slowly, boots pressing into soft earth, leaves brushing against my ankles. The tents rose before me, abandoned canvas, empty, silent, yet moving, rising and falling, slowly like breath. I paused. The air hummed faintly, a low vibration underfoot. Each tent pulsed gently, impossibly, with its own rhythm. I approached the nearest one. Canvas stretched, then sagged, soft and alive. Fingers brushed the fabric. Cool, damp, yet I felt a warmth, fleeting, like memory. I unzipped it slowly. The fabric whispered against itself. Cold air rushed out. Empty. Nothing inside. Only silence, folded into the corners. I stepped back. The tent rose again. A gentle swell, as if inhaling. The fog curled closer, brushing my face. Leaves rustled faintly in the distance. Another tent, rising and falling in slow rhythm. I pressed a hand against the canvas. It shivered beneath my touch. Cold, soft, impossible. I unzipped it. Empty. Air escaping in a quiet sigh. The ground smelled of wet earth and old canvas. The fog pressed tighter. The circle of tents seemed alive, rising and falling, breathing softly. Shadows stretched long between the poles. The hum beneath the soil, faint, insistent. A rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I crouched beside one, fingers tracing the taut canvas. The pulsing beneath it continued. A slow, impossible breathing. Cold air rushing out whenever I opened it. I stood again. The fog wrapped around my legs, soft and damp. Branches tapped lightly above. Leaves whispered in the distance. The tents continued, patient breathing. I imagined what had lain inside. No bodies, no presence, yet the rhythm remained. Slow, deliberate, unsettling in its quiet insistence. I walked between them, boots pressing softly into the damp earth. The canvas swelled and sagged beside me, air escaping with each unzip, shadows curling over the ground. I pressed my palm against one. The rise and fall beneath my hand continued, a pulse beneath the earth. Branches tapped softly above, the fog pressing closer, wet against my skin. I stepped back. The tents seemed to lean slightly toward each other, patient, waiting. The hum beneath my feet persisted, insistent, soft. I looked across the field, empty canvas rising and falling, breathing, cold air rushing from open zippers. No one inside, yet they were alive in absence. I walked slowly toward the edge of the clearing, leaves brushing my boots, fog curling against my legs, branches whispering overhead. The tents continued, gently, impossibly, breathing as I left. The field smelled faintly of wet earth and canvas. Shadows lingered across the ground. The fog pressed softly, patient. And the tents, they breathed on, alone, silent, waiting. The camp was silent. Fog rolled low, curling around the trunks of the pines. The air smelled of damp bark and wet soil. I walked slowly along the path. Boots pressed softly into the moss and fallen needles. Branches brushed against my arms. A faint rustling followed me, though the wind was still. Then I saw them, symbols carved into the trees. Strange, angular shapes, lines that twisted into themselves. Some looked like letters, others like something older. I crouched closer, fingers tracing the grooves. The wood was rough, damp, scented of pine and decay. A faint warmth pressed from the bark beneath my hand, though the air was cold. I stood back. The symbols began to glow faintly, pale, almost imperceptible light curling along the lines. Shadows stretched long across the ground, even though the fog was still, even though the air was calm. I stepped from tree to tree. Each symbol glowed softly, moving shadows across the moss. Lines shifted subtly in the corner of my vision. Impossible movement. No wind to sway the branches, yet shadows bent and stretched. The hum rose faintly. Beneath the soil, beneath the roots, a vibration in my chest. I could feel it press against my ribs. Soft, insistent. I touched another carving, cold wood beneath my palm, yet the glow clung to the tips of my fingers. The air smelled faintly of char and rain. A faint whispering rustled through the trees, like leaves brushing against each other. I stepped back, fog curling around my boots. The symbol's glow intensified slightly, a pale pulse. Shadows leapt and twisted, stretching longer. I could feel them watching, the trees alive in some silent, impossible way. I moved carefully between them, boots pressing into wet moss. The carvings followed my gaze, lines shifting imperceptibly, soft light curling along the grooves, the shadows crawling along the forest floor. I crouched beside one of the larger trees, fingers tracing the angles. The bark trembled faintly under my touch. The hum beneath me pulsed in rhythm with the faint glow, a low vibration rising through my bones. I straightened. The fog pressed against my face. Branches whispered softly above. Shadows twisted across the moss like dark water. The symbol's glow pulsed gently, as if breathing. I turned slowly. The forest seemed endless, every tree carved with lines that shifted in the corner of my vision. The hum rose slightly, insistent. The fog thickened, curling between the trunks. I stepped back again, boots pressing softly into damp earth. The symbol's glow lingered on the bark. Shadows stretched impossibly long. The air pressed cold against my chest. The forest watched silent, patient. I walked along the edge of the carved trees, rustling leaves brushing my arms. The smell of damp bark strong in my nose. The hum beneath the roots persistent, almost alive. Each symbol pulsed faintly as I passed. I paused. A figure of shadow moved between the trees. Or perhaps it was only my imagination. The carving seemed to bend toward it, shadows curling like smoke. The fog pressed tighter, cold against my skin. I breathed slowly. The symbols glowed softly, impossibly. Shadows moved despite the still air. The hum beneath the ground rose in my chest. The trees alive in secret rhythm. I stepped back toward camp, fog curling around my boots, branches brushing softly against my arms. Shadows twisted along the ground. The carving's glow lingered in the corner of my vision, soft, faint, impossible to ignore. I walked faster, boots pressing softly into moss and damp earth. Leaves whispered faintly. The hum beneath the soil remained, a low, insistent rhythm. I did not look back, but I could feel the symbols watching, the pale glow pressing at the edges of my mind. Shadows stretching long across the moss. The forest alive, waiting. The field stretched under the pale moon. Fog lingered low, curling over wet grass. The smell of earth and dew pressed into the air. I walked slowly, boots pressing softly into soft soil, leaves and grass brushing against my legs. Then I saw them, small figures gathered across the field. Children, or something like children. They moved in quiet rhythm, hands brushing the grass. Their faces pale, blurred, almost impossible to focus on. Shadows stretched long from them, far taller than their bodies, distorted, unnatural. I stopped, breath caught in my chest. The fog pressed closer, curling around my ankles. The air hummed faintly, vibrating softly through the ground. They did not speak. They did not turn, only moved in that slow, deliberate rhythm, a quiet dance across the wet field. I stepped closer, soft footsteps pressing into the grass. The figures shifted slightly, shadows bending and stretching further, faces blurred, pale as moonlight, eyes I could not see. The wind brushed across the field. Leaves whispered faintly, yet the children's movement remained steady, deliberate, impossible in their stillness. I crouched behind a tree, fingers pressed into damp bark, the smell of wet soil strong in my nose. The hum beneath the earth persisted, subtle, insistent. One figure stopped, paused, and though its face was blurred, I felt it watching me. I stepped back quietly, boots pressing softly into the wet grass. Shadows stretched like smoke, curling across the field. The fog thickened, soft against my skin. The figures resumed their motion, hands brushing the grass, bodies moving in quiet, impossible rhythm. The pale light of the moon pressed against them. The shadows lengthened and twisted, alive. I imagined their laughter. Not sound, but sensation. A soft pressure in the chest. A weight in the air, cold and still. I moved slowly along the edge of the field. Fog curling against my legs. Leaves brushing softly. The figures followed, or perhaps only seemed to. Shadows bending toward me, stretching long across the grass. One stopped near a tree. Shadows stretching impossibly tall. Pale face blurred in the moonlight. I froze. The fog pressed into my chest. I could feel them watching. Soft, deliberate, patient. I crouched again. The field smelled of wet earth and grass. Branches brushed faintly above. The moonlight touched the pale figures. Shadows rippling along the ground. I stepped back slowly, boots pressing softly into damp soil. The pale children moved across the grass. Hands brushing, bodies swaying. Faces still blurred, shadows impossibly tall. I turned toward the trees. The fog pressed against me. Leaves whispered softly overhead. The figures continued. Quiet, impossible, patient. I did not run. I could not. I only watched. The air hummed faintly, soft vibration against my chest. The children's shadows stretched long into the field. The moon pressed pale light across the grass. The fog curled and pressed closer. The figures moved silently. I stepped slowly back toward the camp, boots pressing into soft earth, leaves brushing my legs, branches whispering overhead. The pale children remained, hands brushing the grass, bodies swaying, shadows stretching tall and long. Quiet, deliberate, impossible. The fog pressed against the field. Moonlight brushed faintly across the grass. I could feel them watching still, and I knew the memory would linger, soft, haunting, patient. The dining hall was quiet. Moonlight spilled through cracked windows. Dust lingered in soft beams, motes drifting in the still air. I stepped inside, wood creaking faintly beneath my boots. The smell of old timber, faintly sour, pressed against my nose. Long tables stretched ahead, plates set neatly, silverware arranged. Empty chairs waited. No one was here, yet the air hummed with something almost alive. I moved closer. The wood beneath my fingers was cool, smooth. Dust clung to the plates, pale and soft. And then it began to shift, slowly, almost imperceptibly. A faint shimmer across the surfaces. Dust lifting, swirling, vanishing as though unseen hands brushed away. Silverware polished by nothing. Plates glinting in the moonlight, clean. The air smelled faintly of iron and old meals. I held my breath. A hush pressed against my chest. The chairs stood still, but I felt them waiting. Patient, I walked along the tables, boots pressing softly into the worn floor. Dust rose lightly beneath my feet, then settled again. The plates gleamed. The silverware caught the pale moonlight. A faint hum began, soft vibration in the air. Not loud, just beneath the edge of hearing, pressing lightly against my ribs. I reached for a plate, cold beneath my fingers. Smooth, heavy, clean, no fingerprints, no marks of anyone touching it. The table seemed to pulse faintly, almost alive, as if waiting for someone to sit, to eat, to return. I stepped back. The dust continued to shift, slowly, deliberately. I could feel the air pressing soft against my skin. The wooden floor creaked faintly, branches outside brushing against the windows. I moved down the row, the hum beneath the floor persistent. Plates set, silverware arranged, dust brushing itself aside, impossibly clean. The smell of wood, faintly burned, mixed with cold air. A shadow stretched along the wall. I froze, the pale light of the moon catching the edge of a plate, silverware glinting. Silent, waiting. I walked more slowly, hands brushing against the table edge. The hum beneath the floor rose faintly, dust shifting away from the plates as if unseen hands lingered. I could feel them hovering just beyond sight. I paused near the last table. Chairs pressed close together, plates aligned perfectly. The faint shimmer on the silverware caught my eye, a subtle rhythm in the dust, rising and falling. The air smelled faintly of warm bread and old iron. I stepped back, boots pressing into the worn wood. The table stretched behind me, plates gleaming, silverware arranged, empty chairs waiting silently, the hum lingering softly in the hall. I turned toward the door. The dining hall seemed larger now, shadows stretching long across the floor, moonlight brushing the tables, dust still shifting, brushing aside impossibly clean. I took one last breath, the plates glinting faintly in pale moonlight, silverware polished by unseen hands. The hum beneath the floor, a quiet vibration. The air pressed close against me, heavy and still. I stepped outside, fog pressing soft against my legs, branches brushing lightly. The hall behind me silent, waiting, plates set, silverware gleaming, dust shifting still, and I could feel it watching, patient, eerie, impossible. The camp lay still beneath the night sky. Fog curled softly around the edges of the trees. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. I walked slowly through the clearing, boots pressed into soft grass. Leaves brushed against my legs. The night hummed faintly, low and almost imperceptible. Above, the stars flickered. Tiny points of light, broken. Some vanished, only to return a moment later. The sky shifted uneven. A soft breath of darkness pressed against the back of my neck. I stopped. The forest around me was quiet. Even the rustling leaves seemed still. The stars blinked again, irregular. A smooth, black nothing spread across the sky. For a heartbeat, the heavens were gone. No moon, no stars. Only smooth, impossible black. The fog pressed closer. A faint vibration hummed in my chest. I took a step forward, boots pressing into wet grass. The hum rose slightly. Not loud, but insistent. Then the stars returned. Flickering points of light, unstable and pale. The air smelled of ozone and damp soil. A subtle chill pressed against my arms. Something vast hovered in the silence above. I tilted my head back. The sky stretched endlessly. The stars blinked and hummed. A pressure in the chest, soft but heavy. The blackness beyond the light seemed to breathe. I moved slowly through the clearing, leaves brushing against my legs, boots pressing into soft earth. The hum beneath me, low, insistent, impossible. The stars flickered, patterns shifting like eyes blinking. I paused near the tree line. Branches whispered faintly overhead. The sky went black again, smooth, impossible. I could feel the hum in my chest, pressing against ribs, against skin. Light returned, flickering unevenly. The stars trembled, like something vast moving just beyond sight. The air pressed soft and heavy, cold and alive. I could hear the fog moving softly, curling around roots and trunks. I stepped forward. The clearing stretched, pale in the starlight. The hum beneath my feet persistent. Something vast waited in impossible black beyond. I breathed slowly. The grass pressed wet against my boots. Leaves whispered overhead. The stars blinked again, fractured and uncertain. The sky seemed to shift subtly, impossible angles bending at the edges of my vision. I crouched briefly, fingers pressed into damp earth. The hum pressed faintly against my palms. The blackness of the sky stretched beyond comprehension. The stars flickered again, uneven, fragile. I straightened. The fog pressed soft against my legs, branches brushing lightly. The air smelled faintly of rain and something metallic. The hum lingered, low and insistent. I walked slowly toward the edge of the clearing, boots pressing softly into grass. The night hummed beneath me. The stars blinked and returned, fractured and pale. The blackness beyond stretched, vast, patient. I stopped. The forest waited quietly. Fog curling low, brushing my ankles, leaves whispering faintly. The stars flickered. The sky went black, smooth and silent. For a moment, nothing existed but the hum, soft vibration against my chest. Something vast, impossibly large, beyond the reach of the mind. And then the stars returned. Pale, flickering, alive. I stepped back slowly, boots pressing into wet grass. The hum lingered beneath me. The night air pressed heavy against my skin. The fog curled along the ground. The forest waited, patient, silent. I turned toward the camp. Leaves brushed softly against my legs. The stars blinked uncertainly above. The sky shifted, black and vast, before returning. Something immense hummed in the silence, and I walked on, aware of its presence. The cabin lay at the edge of the clearing, collapsed, broken beams leaning like tired bones. Fog hugged the ground, curling softly around the wreckage. I stepped closer, boots pressed into damp leaves. The smell of wet wood and rot filled the air. Branches whispered faintly overhead. The air inside moved, not wind, something shallower, gentle, rising and falling like soft breathing. I pressed a hand to the glass of a broken window, cold, fogged immediately by my own breath. And then the glass fogged again, slowly from the other side I froze. No one was inside. Only shadows pressed between the broken walls. The air shifted. A faint hum pressed in the silence. The smell of damp earth and old smoke lingered, curling around me. I moved closer. The floorboards were jagged, splintered, unstable. My fingers brushed with splinters. Each inhale made the air stir softly. The glass fogged again, as though the cabin itself exhaled. I could feel it breathing, slow, deliberate, shallow, hesitant, pressing against the air in soft pulses. Cold fog curling into the gaps in the walls. I crouched, the smell of wet timber heavy against my chest. A soft vibration hummed beneath the boards, almost imperceptible. The breath in the cabin seemed to echo my own, rising, falling, a rhythm I could not match. I leaned closer to a shattered window. Fog clung to my fingers. The air inside rippled slightly, soft, almost like sighs. Shadows pressed against the remaining walls. The smell of decay mixed with cold, crisp air. I stepped inside. The floor creaked beneath my weight. Broken beams pressed at odd angles. Dust drifted slowly in the faint moonlight. The breath followed, gentle, shallow, invisible. I could feel it moving through the gaps in the broken cabin. I paused at the center. The hum rose slightly. Soft vibrations against my legs. The air shimmered faintly. I pressed my palm against the floor. Cold and alive. The fog inside shifted, thickened near the broken glass. Each inhale blurred my vision. The shallow breathing pressed closer. I could feel the rhythm in the chest, in my own ribs. I crouched again, lower this time. Dust rose gently around my knees. The smell of rot sharp against my nose. Branches brushing against collapsed walls whispered softly. The cabin seemed to pulse with the quiet breath. I straightened. The air was heavier here, cold and moving, like lungs filling and emptying slowly. The broken walls groaned faintly. The shadows stretched longer, and the hum beneath the boards pressed against my spine. I took a step back. The fog swirled softly around my boots. Each breath I drew caused the air inside to ripple, soft exhalations brushing the broken windows. The cabin's shallow rhythm stayed with me. Alive, patient, I moved toward the doorframe. The smell of wet timber grew sharper. My fingers brushed the splintered wood. The hum lingered low and insistent. The shadows pressed against every corner. The air seemed almost sentient. I paused at the threshold. The shallow breathing pressed against me. Fog curling softly, rising like a living thing. I felt the cabin watch, silent, expectant. Every inhale mirrored. Every exhale mirrored. I stepped outside. The fog clung to my legs. Branches whispered above, brushing lightly. The hum faded with distance, soft but persistent. The air smelled of wet leaves and old wood. I glanced back once. The broken cabin hunched in the clearing, shadows shifting subtly behind shattered beams. And the shallow breath continued, soft, inevitable, unseen. I walked away slowly, boots pressing into damp leaves. The fog curling behind me. The forest waited silently. The hum faded into distance, but the rhythm of that breathing lingered in my chest. In the night, waiting, the The forest was quiet. Fog hugged the ground, soft and thick. Branches whispered as I stepped through damp leaves. Tiny lights appeared first, faint blue-white, floating between the trees. Not fireflies. Too steady, too deliberate. I followed, each step pressed into soft earth. The air smelled of moss and wet bark. A faint hum pressed beneath my ears. The lights bobbed gently, guiding me. The fog thickened. It brushed my arms like cold silk. Shadows twisted against the trunks. The light shimmered ahead, pale and calm. I paused. A breeze stirred the leaves. The hum pulsed softly with it. The forest held its breath. The lights moved again, leading toward the water. Each step felt lighter. The ground trembled faintly beneath my feet. Not loud, just enough to notice. Branches brushed my face. The smell of wet pine sharpened. The lights drifted around me, hypnotic. I felt drawn in, unable to resist. The path curved. Shadows deepened. The fog thinned near the clearing. The lights hovered above the ground. Steady now. I reached the edge. An empty clearing stretched before me. The water shimmered beyond, still and dark. The ground vibrated faintly beneath my boots, soft, rhythmic, almost like a pulse. The lights hovered, circling slowly. I could feel them against my skin. Cold, insistent. The hum in the air deepened. I crouched slightly. The dirt pressed under my hands. The vibration beneath was subtle, undercurrent beneath everything. The lights blinked slowly, then vanished. I stayed still. The clearing smelled of wet earth and unseen water. Silence pressed against me. Not empty. Alive. I inhaled. Cold air filled my lungs. A shiver rolled down my spine. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Waiting. No footsteps. No whispers. Just the faint pulse of the ground. And the memory of the lights. I took a slow step back. Leaves rustled. Fog curled around my legs. The hum faded. I looked once more toward the water. The clearing was empty. The vibration lingered beneath the soil. Faint, almost imagined, but undeniable. I turned away. The forest stretched dark and quiet behind me. The trail of lights gone. Only the echo of their glow in my mind. Every step away pressed the soft earth beneath. The air smelled of moss and cold water. The hum faded entirely, but I could still feel it. The lights might have been gone, but the forest had left its mark. A pulse, a breath, a memory that followed. I walked slowly, careful alone. The fog swirled softly around me, and somewhere behind the trees, the faint vibration waited. The night was still. Mist curled low over the ground. The pine trees stood silent, tall and dark. I thought I heard laughter first. Faint, far away, soft like children singing in circles. The notes drifted through the fog. High voices overlapping. Somewhere between melody and memory. I stepped closer to the edge of the clearing. The air smelled of wet leaves and cold smoke. My boots pressed into soft earth. Nothing moved except the fog. The singing continued. Words indistinct, half-formed. The notes trembled through the air, like someone calling from a long distance. I tried to follow. Each step felt heavier. The fog wrapped around my legs. The song echoed from everywhere and nowhere. A faint flicker of light caught my eye. Not fire, just a pale glow, hovering. The voices rose slightly, then faded. I stopped, held my breath. The forest hummed beneath the silence. The song continued, but I could see no one. I crouched, listening. The cold pressed against my hands. I felt the earth under my palms vibrate slightly, like tiny footsteps running in circles. The melody twisted. Overlapping voices became sharper. Whispered notes, soft yet insistent, like a memory that shouldn't exist. I reached the clearing. Empty. Only pine needles and damp soil. The song lingered in the mist, just out of reach. I walked slowly along the edge. The voices shifted. Sometimes above me, sometimes behind the trees. Yet nothing stirred. The air tasted faintly of smoke and something sweeter. Not fire, not food. Something familiar, like the echo of forgotten nights. The song wound down, notes fading, leaving only the hum of the night. The fog thickened, curling around my shoulders. breath warm against my cheeks. I turned back toward the camp. The clearing was empty, the lights of cabins dim in the distance. The song had vanished, but the memory stayed. Soft whispers seemed to brush my ears. Unseen, untraceable, the mist carried a faint echo of joy and longing. I felt the ground beneath me settle. The forest exhaled. The night held its silence. The song lingered inside my mind, even as the wind carried nothing outside. I walked slowly back. Every step pressed lightly into moss and dirt. Every shadow held a trace of those distant voices. And I knew they would always follow the stillness of the night. The forest was quiet. Fog pressed low against the ground. Branches scraped softly against each other. I walked slowly along the narrow path. The air smelled damp and cold. Each step sank slightly into soft moss and fallen leaves. Then I saw it, a faint glow at the edge of the trees. A cabin, small and still, as if waiting. Its light pulsed gently, pale and warm. I stepped closer. The hum of the forest seemed to quiet itself around me. The cabin's shape was clear. Windows dark, door closed. Yet it felt alive, as if it breathed along with the night. I reached the clearing. The glow brightened slightly. My boots pressed into dry dirt. The air was thick, tinged with something faintly sweet, like smoke and pine resin. I reached toward the cabin. Fingers stretched out, hesitant, and then it vanished. The glow disappeared. The outline of the cabin dissolved into the mist. Leaves fell silently. Branches shifted without wind. I stumbled backward, confused, cold, alone. Only the faint echo of my own heartbeat filled the space, and the sound of footsteps, soft, slow, from behind. But no one moved through the trees. I turned in every direction. The fog thickened. The path seemed to twist beneath my feet. The forest smelled damp, untouched. Then I saw faint traces, soft indentations in the moss. Footsteps leading where the cabin had been, leading nowhere. I followed them quietly, each step careful, echoing softly in the still night. The glow returned for a heartbeat, then vanished again. The forest held its breath. I felt it pressing close, listening, waiting. I paused, hearing nothing but the faint, lingering hum of air between the trees. The footsteps, still there, echoing. I stepped back toward the main path. The forest seemed unchanged, yet I knew it wasn't. Something had passed through here, something unseen. The fog shifted again. I thought I saw shapes, tall shadows flitting between the trunks, always just out of focus. The path led me back to the clearing, empty, silent, except for the lingering echo of footsteps and the memory of a glow that never truly touched the ground. I moved on slowly. The night felt heavier. The cabin had vanished. But the fear stayed behind, wrapped in fog and soft, unseen footsteps. The air smelled warm, heavy with late summer grass. But the lake was still, frozen, solid. I stepped closer, boots crunching in the thin frost at the shore. The ice stretched far, pale and smooth. No ripples, no wind, just a flat, silent surface reflecting the dim moonlight. I bent down, hand brushing the cold edge. It was hard, unyielding, but beneath it, shapes moved, slowly, pale, following my steps. I froze, my breath fogged, lingering between me and the ice. The world was quiet, but not empty. The shapes shifted with me, mirrored under the frozen sheet. I stepped forward again. The ice groaned faintly, though the warmth of the air should have made it soft. A chill rose through my spine. The shapes moved closer, though trapped below. I crouched, fingertips hovering over the surface. They were smooth, pale, almost like pressed shadows. No faces, no features, just presence. The forest around the lake was still. Leaves hung in the branches like suspended whispers. A soft hum rose from the ice, subtle, vibrating through the soles of my boots. The shapes shifted, ever so slowly. I tried to look away, but my eyes kept tracing their movement beneath the ice. Each step I took was mirrored. Each pause echoed. A mist drifted across the lake's surface, cold, smelling faintly of moss and wet stone. The shapes became clearer. Long limbs, pale torsos, following, waiting. I breathed shallowly. The hum grew slightly louder, a heartbeat almost, or perhaps my own. I reached out, and the ice vibrated beneath my palm, a subtle, terrifying pulse. The shapes shivered beneath, as if aware I could see them. I stepped back, feeling the frost cling to my ankles. Shadows of trees stretched across the frozen surface. But beneath the ice, the pale forms lingered, tracing my retreat. The wind stirred, branches rustled above, and still no ripples on the ice, just a hum and the shapes mirroring, following patient. I walked along the shore, boots pressing into soft earth. The vibration traveled through the ground. The pale shapes shifted with each movement. I paused at the far edge. The air smelled faintly of smoke and something mineral, like wet stone heated by the sun. The ice stretched before me, unbroken, and beneath they waited. I turned slowly, expecting to see them at the edge of the trees, but the forest was empty, alone, except for the hum beneath my feet, and the frozen shapes, silent, patient, beneath the ice. I stepped back toward camp. The ice remained solid. The shapes stayed beneath, following, their presence lingering even as the mist swallowed them from sight. And in the still night, I could hear the faint hum, like breath trapped in glass, whispering, waiting beneath the frozen lake. The camp was quiet tonight. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Fog lingered low, curling along the paths. In the center of the clearing, the statue waited. Old stone, weathered in gray. Its eyes faintly glowed, pale light against the darkness. I walked closer, soft footsteps in the damp grass. The mist wrapped around me. It smelled faintly of moss and cold stone. I paused. The statue's eyes seemed to shift, following me, though I knew the stone could not move. A hum rose from the ground, or maybe from the air itself, a quiet vibration, soft under my boots. I circled slowly. Each step made the fog swirl, the glow in its eyes. Always ahead, tracking. Branches rustled in the distance. The wind carried a whisper, a memory or just the trees. I couldn't tell. I knelt near its base. The stone was rough, damp with night. No warmth. Nothing moved, yet its eyes, they were aware. I stood again, and the clearing felt smaller, the air heavier. Even the fog seemed to lean toward it. I took a step back. Its gaze followed, unwavering. A quiet dread settled in my chest, like breath held too long. I tried to look away, to focus on the trees, the path, but the eyes glowed, pale and patient. The grass whispered under my feet. Shadows shifted with the moonlight. The statue remained, silent, immovable, and yet watching. I whispered to the night. Nothing answered. The hum remained low, steady, rising and falling like shallow breathing. I stepped toward the edge of clearing. The mist parted, revealing the dark trees beyond. And still, the statue's eyes tracked me, pale light in the fog, unblinking, patient. I stopped listening. Even the wind seemed to pause. Even the forest held its breath, alone with the watching stone. I left slowly, boots pressed into damp soil. The hum faded, but the eyes lingered in my mind, watching, waiting. And when I glanced back, the clearing was empty, the statue still, its glow faint, but I felt it in every shadow along the path. Every breath I drew, the night swallowed it, and yet I knew it never truly left. The night air was thick with mist. Pine needles glistened under pale moonlight. A low wind stirred the branches, carrying the scent of damp earth and resin. I walked slowly, boots sinking into soft soil. Every step felt heavier than the last. The forest seemed to hum beneath me, faintly, like a memory vibrating through the ground. Above the treetops, shadows shifted. Something moved in the fog. A light, larger than the moon, passed silently overhead. It wasn't bright, just immense, pale humming. I stopped. The needles trembled against my fingertips. Cold, damp, alive. The hum rose and fell, a low heartbeat that pressed against my chest. The forest bent with the wind, though the air was still. Branches arched unnaturally, following the passage of the light. It drifted slowly, almost lazily yet precise. I breathed. The hum vibrated through my bones. Through the mist, Shapes of treetops shimmered, and then another light appeared, larger, silent. I wanted to step back. My legs wouldn't move. The fog wrapped around my ankles, soft and clinging. The lights moved together, hovering. They were immense, impossibly wide, filling the sky with quiet awe and fear. The hum deepened. I felt it in my stomach, in my chest, and even behind my eyes. The air itself pulsed with it. The lights passed over the clearing, reflecting faintly on the leaves and wet bark. Then they vanished, into nothing, into fog. I reached out, but my hand met only cold mist. The forest exhaled around me, rustling, sighing alive, and silent again. The shadows of trees leaned strangely toward where the lights had been. Every branch seemed to stretch, as if straining to see, to follow. I turned slowly. The hum lingered, softly, almost like breath, not threatening, but insistent. I walked back toward the camp. Each step disturbed the fog. Every rustle of pine needles whispered. I glanced up once more. The sky was empty. No lights, no movement, but the hum stayed. A memory of motion, a vibration under the soles of my boots. And I knew it had not left. The night carried on, pale and quiet. Yet something remained over pines, watching, waiting, silent, vast, and unknowable. The night air was heavy, thick with the smell of smoke and wet pine. The ground beneath me was soft, cold, dotted with fallen needles. At the camp center, a single fire burned, bright, almost alive. Its orange glow stretched long fingers across the forest floor. I stepped closer. The heat brushed my cheeks. The wood crackled faintly, though the silence around it seemed thicker than the flames. Figures gathered there, tall, thin. They moved slowly, deliberately, their shadows long and stretching, reaching across the trees, over the roots, over the frost-dusted earth. I froze. The shadows danced, merging, separating, but then I noticed I had no shadow. The firelight licked the grass, reflected in the eyes of the figures, or perhaps it was only the light bending. The hum of the forest quieted, as if holding its breath. The figures circled the flames. Slow steps that didn't stir the dirt, soft swishes that didn't touch the needles. And I stood alone, light falling on me, but no shadow beneath. The smoke curled upward, tangling with the low fog that settled between the trees. It carried the scent of ash, wood, and something old, something that had always waited here. I reached out, the tips of my fingers brushing the cold night air, but they met nothing. The figures seemed aware of me, though their faces were featureless, their limbs like elongated branches swaying in an invisible breeze. The shadows around the fire pulsed, stretching toward the darkness beyond the trees, then recoiling, like they were breathing, a slow, deliberate rhythm that pressed against my chest. I took a step back. The ground was damp, each step muffled by moss and fallen needles. The firelight caught a glint along the forest floor, and I realized everywhere the figures moved, shadows followed. Except me, a breeze whispered through the pines, soft and cold, carrying the hum of the unseen. The flames flickered, casting strange shapes across the trees. Tall figures, thin, still moving, ever circling. I felt my heartbeat, slow, loud, and alone. The warmth of fire didn't reach me, though its light embraced the others. The silence thickened. Even the wind stilled. Only the crackle of the fire spoke, low, persistent, echoing across the clearing. A rhythm, a pulse, a reminder. I tried to call, my voice a ghost in the dark, swallowed by the night, by the figures, by their endless, stretching shadows. I realized then, fully, that I was outside the circle, outside the fire's protection, outside the pull of light and shadow. I was alone, always alone. The fire burned higher for a moment, then settled into steady warmth. The figures paused. Shadows stretched again, and I felt it, a final quiet, a stillness that pressed in from every side. I turned slowly, feeling the damp, cold forest beneath my boots, and stepped backward, away from the fire, away from the figures and their shadows. The night did not answer. The fire did not follow. And my own shadow remained absent, leaving only me, breathing alone in the dark,